All right, we do have a quorum. Thanks, folks, for being here. And so I'll convene our regular meeting of the Burlington Planning Commission for Wednesday, February 22nd, 2022. First item on the agenda is the agenda. Are there any changes to it?
There are none from staff.
Okay, anyone else? Nope. Then we have our agenda as presented. Item 2 is a public forum. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the Planning Commission pretty much on any item that you might like. We do have a few different items on our agenda, substantive items. And if you're here to speak to one of those, you might want to just wait till that item comes up. And then it will be more in the context of our discussion. I see Sharon is here. Sharon, welcome.
Yeah, and just a quick note, Sharon had reached out earlier today to ask that question, Andy, about whether she should speak about all the items she's interested in or wait. And I had advised her to speak about them all up front, but if you would like to take public comment throughout the agenda, we can do that way.
No, it's fine to speak to all of them up front.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So it's a little awkward because I might be asking questions that are answered in the presentation, although I did try to do my homework and review the presentation. So I want to speak to two items. One is the joint parking plan. And my questions really are, when I looked at the plan, I didn't see that UVM-MC, so the hospital didn't show any parking off of East Avenue that is accessed by University Road. And when I looked at UVM, I saw some parking, but it didn't seem to be satellite parking for the hospital off of University Road. And why this is relevant is that in my ward, there's the Trinity campus, and obviously you heard the presentation, and they were proposing that the parking would be addressed by parking on at Centennial, and that they would consider terminating some of the lease that they have with the hospital. So I was interested to know how many spaces there were there for satellite parking and who parks there, since I couldn't really extract that from the plan. If I missed it, I apologize. I thought it was relevant to understand the overall parking excess or deficit as it relates to satellite parking and the need for parking for each of those campuses. So that's my first question. Is that clear? And I don't know if it will be asked or the answer will come forward during the presentation, but that's my point about that presentation. There's a lot of information, so I'm going to learn a lot from listening. So thank you for that. The second has to do with the steep slope ordinance, which before I lost my election, I reached out to Paul Bierman, and we had talked about really trying to make sure that this happened, to have something in place that address some of the issues that we have experienced in Ward 1, but it's really for all steep slopes. It's not specific to the ward that I live in. And so I just wanted to thank Scott and the Planning Commission Ordinance Committee for, first of all, taking it up, and for listening to the comments and the feedback, the printed feedback that I gave and that Paul gave. I'm not sure if others gave that I didn't see, but although this really didn't address all of my concerns, it certainly is something that is a good place to have. I mean, I feel like I'm satisfied with what is moving forward to you. I had a question. I reached out to Scott, and it's sort of a two-part question. With your geotech analysis, which is going to be required, I wanted to know two pieces because I'm not sure. When geotech analysis is done, would that determine the soil? Would they do soil borings, but would they realize that earth was either compacted all earth with tree roots, etc., or that it was infill, like some of the sections we have on Colchester Avenue in Riverside, where it was an old dump. So I thought it was really germane to understand if it would detect really solid soil or whether it would show less stability. I think that would be captured with the soil borings. But then the second part of the question has to do with the water runoff that can occur underground and whether those borings would determine that, because some of the land that I'm familiar with has this water that runs under and destabilizes the very ground that it's running under. So I just wanted to understand what we're getting and what we might miss from this ordinance. But I think it's a really good step forward and much better than what we have currently. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sharon. Is there anyone else to speak during the public forum?
Yes, next is Barbara. I think this is Barbara Hedrick.
Hi,
Hi,
everybody.
Barbara.
Hello. I'm also here this evening to talk about the Joint Institutional Parking Management Plan. And my first comments are to really try and motivate CATMA to do something different, something more effective to bring down the number of single occupancy vehicles. But the point I want to start with is that even though the Planning Commission has a pending zoning amendment that will eliminate off-street parking requirements, UVM and the institution still have the obligation under Article 8 to balance their parking demand and supply. And that's really a critical point. And they can do that through on-campus parking and or transportation demand management. So if UVM is going to reduce or keep flat the number of parking spaces it has on campus, that means it's all the more important that their transportation demand management programs are effective. And because we're in a climate crisis, they really need to bring down those SOV numbers. Right now, 60% of employees and students are driving to campus SOV, and that's a lot of cars. I sent you a document that shows those numbers. So, same is true for Champlain College. You know, that's another 1,000 cars. So when UVM in their Joint Institutional Parking Management Plan section says fewer students are bringing cars to campus, I just want to convey my extreme doubt about that claim, because I've seen in Front Porch Forum students say that UVM is not selling them on-campus parking permits, even though they live on campus and they're qualified to have the permits. And so students are asking neighbors and residents for a permit so they can park on the street or park in their driveway. And so I think that UVM's numbers have been manipulated to show fewer permits sold to students, but those cars have just been pushed into the community. The other piece of data in the report that you should really question is when UVM says, or CATMA says, I think it's like 17 cars from UVM park on the street. That is such a ridiculously low number, because just on South Prospect, between Cliff Street and Davis Road, there are 40 cars that come every day and park there. And most of them are students, because I'm usually out walking and I can see the students race down the street to see if there's a parking spot. They do a U-turn real fast and then come back and try and get a spot if it's available. So it creates traffic, it creates unsafe driving because they're late for class and they're trying to get those few spots that might be left. It was so bad that the students actually started taking down the resident-only parking signs on certain sections of South Prospect at the very beginning of the year and parking there. So DPW had to come back and put the signs back up to get the students out of that area. And if, Megan, if you're willing, I'd like to share some photos that I took today of all the cars that are coming to South Prospect to show that that data in the report is not valid. Can I do a screen share? The other thing is we have a fraternity called AGR that's on South Prospect. Normally about 8 cars park in their driveway. They're leasing parking spaces to students now who can't find a space on campus because UVM's not selling them permits. So now there are 50 cars in that driveway and they're encroaching on the sidewalk. So when UVM says it has a parking surplus, I don't believe it. I've shown you the data, but also it's a manufactured surplus because they're just not selling the permits to the students and they're parking in this community. Now, we don't want people driving. We want fewer parking spaces, but the way to do that is for UVM to start providing buses from out of town park and ride lots, Heinsberg, Williston, Milton, and bring employees in by bus to the Davis Center so that those commuters aren't driving every day, those long distances SOB. So one last comment, and this is really the most important comment of all for me this evening, and that has to do with the zoning amendment that's pending to eliminate off-street parking minimums. The very last paragraph of Article 8 says that, traditionally, this is before you modified it, that the DRB had to find that UVM had a parking surplus or UVM would have to provide the minimum number of parking spaces in order to get their permit approved. But now that you've eliminated the parking space requirements, we still need consequences if UVM has a parking deficit. Because if there's no consequence, the cheapest option for UVM is to not build a garage, not provide the commuter buses from out of town, not to do anything that's going to cause them expense. They'll just have their people park in the neighborhoods, and that's not reducing pollution or SOV. So we really need that last paragraph to say something. This is just one idea, something to the effect of, if UVM has a parking space deficit, then their permit shall not be approved until they implement transportation demand management or some other solution that brings their parking into balance. But it cannot burden neighborhood streets with their parking needs. That's really my hope, that if you finish that zoning amendment, I hope you fix it before it goes to Ordinance Committee with that. Because just like with housing, UVM will not do anything unless they have to. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and listening to my concerns about this. And is it okay if I share screen just real quickly, Megan?
Is it possible, Megan?
Andy, I think it's really up to you. I mean, we don't typically do that during public forum. I was going to offer that if Barbara wanted to send something, I could make sure that everybody gets it and it gets posted online as a communication.
That'd be
But
great.
if I was in the room, I could be able to hold up a photo. So it's no different.
It's up
than
to
that.
Andy. It's up to
Yeah,
Andy.
it's fine. I mean, it's fine. Also, Megan, while you're doing that, while you're getting her set up to be able to do that, just in terms of the parking ordinance, that's with the city council now, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So Barbara, on that one, on the ordinance you were talking about, the zoning that you were talking about, to eliminate the parking requirements, the minimum parking requirements, that came to us from the city council, just asking us for our feedback. We gave it an in-depth look, but that's back with them. So it's really barely been with us at all. Just so you know the status of that. And it's not with us now anymore.
Okay. Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay, so this is on South Prospect down by Davis Road looking north. You can see all the cars that show up every day around 7 a.m. Most of them leave about 5, but I don't know now that UVM is not providing on-campus students with parking. If they're there overnight, they're not supposed to be. That's looking south. So this goes on for 2 blocks. These are cars that live the students live at Redstone Apartments here, but they don't want to pay for a permit. So they park in front of this person's house between Redstone Apartments and the Burlington Country Club. And they regularly wake up that family because they come home around, students come home from downtown around midnight. This is the fraternity AGR. That's one side of their parking lot that's filled with cars. Here's the other side that's filled with cars. And here you can see with the white car on the left, how it's encroaching on the sidewalk and the cars are encroaching on the front yard. That was all. I'll stop sharing the screen and thank you for your time.
Great. Thanks, Barbara.
Mhm.
Megan, anyone else?
That is all I had that I saw that wanted to speak during public forum, Andy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for the folks who spoke to us today. Item 3 is chair's report, and I don't have anything to report. So we'll go to item 4, which is director's report. Megan.
Okay, I have a number of updates for you tonight. The first is that last night at the city council meeting, it kind of felt like it was the Scott and Megan show and Kim Sturdivant show. There were a number of items that you all have seen recently that were on their agenda for action. So the first is that they approved the nature-based climate solutions addendum to the open space protection plan. So something that Scott and the Conservation Board presented to you back in November. So that was approved by the council, and the next time we do an update to our comprehensive plan, we'll formally re-adopt it and incorporate that in by reference. They also approved, they held a public hearing and approved 3 zoning amendments that were recommended by the commission. You might remember them. They were to change the definition of the adaptive reuse historic buildings, adaptive reuse of historic buildings, some changes to the location and way that our historic preservation bonuses work, and an amendment that provides some simplifications to our permitting process. So specifically for small lots, shoreland development, and what's the other one I'm forgetting, Scott? Oh, when a commercial use, or when non-residential uses are changed to another permitted non-residential use. So all of those were adopted by the city council last night. And I'm sure you've seen in the news that they also took action on the Chapter 18 portion of the short-term rental work that has been in the works for a couple of years now. There were a number of amendments to the language that was the subject of a public hearing at their last meeting. Ultimately, what got adopted was a very streamlined version of what you all had worked on together with the council's ordinance committee. This allows for short-term rentals within the host's own residence, the short-term rental of seasonal homes, which there are several dozen. These are mostly properties that are not necessarily weatherized to be occupied year-round and are assessed as seasonal homes by the city's assessor. And then there is an allowance for an offsite host to have a short-term rental in a multi-unit property if another unit on the property is rented to a Section 8 voucher holder. So we'll be meeting internally tomorrow to talk about what the next steps are. There's still the zoning piece of this amendment that has not yet been acted on that will come next. And there are a number of questions just about how do we start to communicate and implement this policy, and where does it go next? So we'll keep you up to date on that.
So Megan, on the short-term rental one, it sounds like they've kept the distinction between the portion that's in zoning and then more of the rules and regulations that are in just the regular city code.
That's correct. Yeah, I think that solution was one that people universally like, especially because of the flexibility that it offers.
Good. Okay, thanks.
The council ordinance committee, this came up during the last public comment. The council ordinance committee is most likely meeting next week to talk about your feedback on the parking and transportation demand management ordinance. I think Kim is here. I think it's going to be next Wednesday, the 2nd. So if anybody is interested, I know Andy, you've asked about this a couple of times. If any of you are interested in attending, you're welcome to.
It'll be at 5 starting on Zoom.
At 5?
Yeah.
Okay. And then one other item that is something that you all have worked on that I thought you might be interested in hearing about is the mayor was actually invited to participate in a webinar that was hosted by the White House about promoting ADUs as a housing option, and really getting into the weeds with a number of the federal agencies, talking about efforts to bring funding resources to ADU construction, trying to make it easier for homeowners to actually access the resources they need to be able to make those a reality. So the work that you all did around helping us consider changes to our zoning ordinance to make ADUs more permissive was something that the mayor shared with the audience from across the country. So that was a pretty cool opportunity to share our work. And Scott and I are actually going to be meeting with BED in a couple of weeks to talk about how, you know, they might be able to work with property owners to implement energy efficiency projects in ADU creation as well. So trying to achieve multiple goals there. Town meeting day, I think you all know, is next Tuesday. Just a reminder, if you haven't already put your ballot in the mail or in a drop box, to do so. We will be starting our budget process after the outcome of the town meeting election. So usually by this time of year, we would be giving you some kind of an update on, you know, our preliminary ideas for the next fiscal year's budget. So just wanted to let you know that that will be coming at a future meeting. And the final, but maybe most exciting update that I have to share with you is that we will have a new principal planner joining us in a couple of weeks. Thanks to Andy for participating in our interview panel. We will be welcoming Charles Dillard, who is a planner that is currently working in Raleigh, North Carolina, to our team in mid-March. So very excited to have him joining us virtually at first until he and his family are able to relocate to Vermont. So I would anticipate that at your second meeting in March, you'll get to meet him.
So at his interview, it was clear that he'd studied a lot of the work that we'd done, you know, the planning documents, a lot of the zoning documents, a lot of that. So I would expect that when he shows up virtually or in person, that he's going to be able to hit the ground running pretty quickly because he's already done a lot of homework and he seems really, really well qualified. Megan, you did a great job in recruiting for this position.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, he was particularly interested in a lot of our South End plan work, and so I think he'll be excited to get involved in some of the zoning amendment projects that we have on our plate. So, and we'll introduce him more fully at that time.
Great. Anything else, Megan? Are you all set?
That's it.
Great. Well, thank you. We'll move on to item 5, which is the Burlington High School zoning. Who is taking this one on?
Okay, I am going to, hang on, Marty. I am going to promote a couple folks to be panelists here. This is going to be introduced by the BSD high school team, and they have a couple of things to share with you to correspond with the request that they would like you to consider. All right, so Marty, and will you start us off here, Marty, or?
I will, yep.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello, welcome.
I'm sorry, what?
Welcome.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for
thank
coming.
you. My name is Marty Spalding. I'm the Director of Property Services for the school district. Also here on our behalf is Joe Wythe from White and Burke, who is going to be leading us through this, rezoning effort. We also have with us Randy Burnett from Colin Lindbergh's office, who's part of the design team, and Dave Marshall from CEA, who is our civil engineer. We're here tonight to discuss with the commission the potential of rezoning the 52 Institute Road site. As you know, we are in the process of redesigning a new high school and tech center. The current site falls under the recreational conservation district. So it it's a, non-conforming site for school use. There's other zoning requirements that we currently don't meet on the site, such as, the current lot coverage for recreational district is 5% and we're at like 35%. I think the building height is at max of 35 feet and we're at like 51 feet. So in our initial discussions with the zoning department, we talked about when building a new school, if we potentially build that new school not to exceed the current conditions, then we probably wouldn't need to go through this rezoning process. Like, for example, if the new school has a 50-foot high roof or current lot coverage of 35%, then we would be exempt under the current standards. And then we also know that there's another statute that is a state statute 24 VSA 44-113 that puts limits on municipal bylaws in regards to input on specific details such as size, height, setbacks, etc., that we could also rely on building the new school on this non-conforming site. But what makes more sense is that we actually go through this process of rezoning the site so that we are in compliance with the zoning regulations. So what we're proposing tonight is to talk about what this process might look like for rezoning the site. We've been working with Megan to talk through what that path might look like, and what we're potentially proposing is to actually create a new sub-district underneath the existing institutional district. There is not, as you probably know, there is not currently a school district. So where we felt that we would fall in, more in compliance around an existing district is under the institutional district, but actually create a sub district specific for schools. So hopefully Megan can speak to that a little bit more. And as I said, we also have some of our design team here to if there is a need to go more into the weeds on the details of what we're proposing, they'll be prepared to speak to that as well.
Great, thank you.
If it's helpful, I'll just add to what Marty said about kind of the idea of the zoning amendment that they're coming to talk to you about tonight is similar to for example, the Trinity Core Campus Overlay District that we talked about at our last meeting. We have our base zoning district, which is our institutional zoning district that applies to much of UVM, Champlain, and the medical center's campus areas, a little bit beyond that as well. And then we have these overlay districts that set specific parameters for parts of campus to help us achieve certain goals that we have for the development of those areas of the campus. So what Marty was saying is that we were proposing that, we may want to consider zoning the 52 Institute Road property to institutional and creating an overlay district that would be specific to this property that would help us achieve some of the development goals for that property. So I think, yeah, of course. I think, Marty, you and Joe had mentioned that you might have some exhibits that you might want to share with the Planning Commission to help them understand a little bit more about the Institute Road site and why the zoning amendment is a pertinent question.
Yeah, Joe, do you have that? And I assume
Yeah,
someone needs to give Joe.
I don't have that up. I mean, I think Randy, you might have that ready to go, or, okay. So Randy, I think Randy has an exhibit that shows some of the challenges that we're facing with that site. Specifically the topography is quite challenging. We've got some poor soils on the site. And then also, as we mentioned in our memo to the Planning Commission, we've probably the northern half of the site north of Institute Road is encumbered by the the city's natural resource protection overlay district. So there's a few things going on with the property that limits really the developable area, you know, for a new high school and tech center, which, you know, is going to be a pretty large building. You know, we're looking at around 300,000 square feet. You know, it's an institutional building. We're going to need some parking, of course, with that. So those things just all come into play in trying to figure out, you know, where can we place a building of that size on this property and get the height that we need, and you know, really just to be able to meet you know, current educational requirements, you know, that we have through the state, as well as just the desire to, you know, design and construct a building that really promotes 21st century learning and educational goals that the district has. So, you know, we identified some of those issues in our memo where we made some recommendations regarding max building height, max lot coverage, you know, uses that we think should be allowed in this overlay district or sub-district. And we can describe a little bit. I mean, we're still in the very early stages of site assessment and design, so we don't really have a lot of specifics that we can really present at this time, but at least we can kind of show you the site and some of the issues we're dealing with. So I see that Randy has brought up the plan. I'm seeing a big Zoom box on top of it. Is everybody else seeing that, or is that just me?
Yeah, I
think
was
we all
gonna
are.
ask Randy for that.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I think my share kind of got hung up on the file there. It might be a little big there. Let me try that again to see if that works.
Much better.
Is that better? Okay, this is sort of an aerial existing conditions plot that civil engineering put together for us. And I can point out just a few of the key features. There's kind of a dark, bold dashed line that wraps sort of the tree line of the Arms Forest, designating that area of the site. The parking lot is in the middle of the drawing here. Institute Drive at the bottom of the sheet runs east-west down towards the North Beach, and North Avenue, which is just kind of kissing off to the side of the sheet here, running north-south to the right there. So the anticipated new build is east of the existing building, over the existing parking lot and up closer to the road. There's a few dashed lines in here representing some of the old agricultural buildings that used to be on the site there. We've got several kinds of challenges. The grade contour changes are quite drastic on this site. We drop nearly 40 feet east to west as you go down North Avenue. So that provides a lot of design challenges to a structure. And going north to south, there's as much as 65 feet of elevation change, which is also quite a bit of challenge for the site. In addition to the contour elevation changes, we have quite a bit of subsurface challenges that we're dealing with. And we've had some geotech activities that were out there from the previous project that we have information from. We had a session also in November. We had a few samplings done, and then they're also out there this week collecting further data. And I'll just share this real briefly. What this kind of shows in the red are kind of the areas of concern where the refusal depths on those borings are quite deep. Many of them beyond 30 feet. Some of them we didn't even hit refusal as deep as 55 feet. The green areas are some better areas where we hit refusal anywhere 15 feet or less. So we definitely have some subsurface challenges. with this site in addition to the boundaries of the Arms Forest, and also in addition to our schedule challenges of removing the existing buildings, to meet the desired schedule for the school, it's thought that we would start construction simultaneous as the demolition of the existing buildings. So as you can see, we're really kind of neck down to some difficult conditions on site constraints with a lot of what's going on here. This plan, if you can see that, is a plan of the contaminated soils, urban soils. So where we find good, suitable foundation borings, we are also having to deal with remediation of the site soils. So just to throw another complexity issue into it. And then we did a quick little massing study showing the current. This is presuming if we build to a 60-foot height and the stepping ordinance of a horizontal distance of 65 feet of those limitations. If you're cut through the site looking north from Institute Road, the limitations of what the building might look like if the building is brought up close to Institute Road, which of course would be sitting on those poor soils that we're not sure we're even able or capable of building on top of.
So just to add on to what Randy was saying there with that graphic at the end for the commissioners, that is a model of how we measure building height. So they're just trying to demonstrate kind of how the building would change in terms of its height limit across the property.
Which we'll point out is very, very difficult to meet with a large institutional style building. So, building height is going to be an issue that we're definitely going to want to talk to you about as we get further into this discussion of zoning changes for this parcel. But I think kind of a broader picture thing I would like to say regarding this parcel, and just from a planning perspective, the 52 Institute Road property is pretty unique in that its historic use has been for secondary educational use, which I believe predates the current zoning of the property. And it's also somewhat of a secluded piece of property in that the surrounding land uses are mostly undeveloped. You've got cemetery to the south, you've got the Arms Forest to the north, you've got the campground and Rock Point to the west, and really the only development in the area or the immediate area is the housing development across the street. But we kind of see this as an appropriate property to be included in the institutional district and have its own special overlay district that really is designed to promote continued use for educational purposes, and allowing whatever dimensional requirements are needed to make this a really nice functional 21st century learning institution.
Great, thanks. Is there anything else from you folks? Okay, let me then, thank you for all that. Let me open it up to questions or comments from the commission. And I think there is a fundamental question that's being asked of us, and correct me if I'm wrong on this one. Right now, there's not a specific zoning change that's being asked for. I think that request is still in the works, but in the broader picture, the request is whether we would be open to having a zoning change, and in particular, changing the district that it's in, from what it is now to an overlay of the institutional district or something else that's like that. So the main question is are we as a commission open to seeing some of these kinds of changes happen to that area? And with that, let me open it up to comments, questions to the commission. Alex?
I mean, Andy, what's the alternative? Like, we either create an institutional overlay district or what? Like, and you know, we've needed a new high school for a long time, so I don't see much of a choice on that one. Tell me if I'm wrong.
I don't disagree with you. Anyone else?
I
I'm not seeing other hands really, but I'll just give you a brief commentary that I have on this, which is, I think we've talked about zoning for our schools off and on for a number of years. I know, I've been looking at this, almost since I began on my work on the council, which was many years ago. And this issue comes up time and time again. And for some reason or another, it's ended up the way it is now, where it's just, we're trying to fit the schools in within the existing zoning that's around the schools. It really has made no sense, to me at least, almost for as long as I've been involved in this. And I know we've talked about, whether it's on the commission, the council, planners, whoever has talked about how we should really be updating the zoning for where our schools are. So, because as it has been pointed out, just about none of what's on that land matches what's in the zoning code for, so there's a complete disconnect, which makes anything that they do there for any, not just at the high school, but for any of our schools in Burlington, a real challenge. So whether institutional zoning overlay is the right one, I don't really know what the answer to that is. I'd leave that to, Megan and Scott and the others to, come back with a more specific recommendation on that. But in terms of trying to fit whatever anyone's trying to do in a school, at a school property, isn't going to work. So I think a zoning change is well warranted. So I am, for one, very open to the concept. And it sounds like, from what I've seen, the reaction I'm seeing from the other commissioners, I think there's probably a broad consensus that zoning can be changed to better fit what's needed there. Let me go to Michael and then come back to you, Marty.
Yeah, I just want to, as with regards to the memo that was presented, the maximum building height, the recommendation of 60 feet, there was just a discussion here, given the setbacks down. And if you look at the existing footprint, it kind of goes above that 60 feet. I suppose, like, in an ideal world without compromise, is that still the height you want, or would you want more height?
I don't know who you're asking, but
Any of you?
I think we're still in the conceptual design phase, so it's hard for us to answer that. So more may be better, but we realized that we needed to start this process, and ideally it would be better to start this process after we've kind of come up with those conceptual designs. However, just timing, we didn't want to wait until we have those designs. So we feel like, this process is going to take a little while, which simultaneously we'll have more information as we go along. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, my point just being, I don't want that number to inadvertently become set in stone just because it's been presented. So I want, at least from my perspective, I would argue that there's still flexibility on the number should the school need it. And yes, with young kids, definitely want to see this move forward as quickly as possible.
Let me just build off a little bit of what Michael was just saying. When you began your presentation, you were tying it into the current zoning, and trying to show how things might be able to be done to fit into that. And it almost seems like some of what you were talking about, even with the change of zoning that you're asking for, is still trying to hold to somewhat to the current. I'd say, as you're going through this whole planning process, just discard what's there already, the current zoning, and come back to us with what you think is really needed. Whether you get it or not, that's going to be part of the process that we go through, but I'd suggest let's focus on what you're looking for, what actually you need. And don't be too concerned about, the current zoning and what's there. Again, I don't know where it will end up. We may not give you everything that you want, but let's begin with that. So at least we know what that is.
That's great.
And if I
Unless
could
somebody
just-
disagrees with me, I just want to check my fellow commissioners and just make sure I'm not speaking out of turn on this. Okay.
If I could just
Megan.
add to that, we, Scott and I and the team here presenting the school have talked about, particularly about how we measure height with it being such a wide site. And we're talking about a building that will have, kind of large expanses of floors that need to be level. You can imagine how that image that Randy showed us would be a great way to build, townhouses or, even maybe a residential building to some degree on a site that is, with this much topography, but for a large institutional building, it does present some challenges. So we have been talking about whether there are some creative ways, again, drawing a comparison to the discussion that you had at your last meeting about the Trinity campus overlay district, where you might have one height limit within a certain distance of the road and another height limit setback that might allow them to take advantage of that topography. We ultimately don't want to get into a position, I think, where we have different standards for how you measure height in different parts of the city. We want to maintain that standard, but we could do something with, kind of setting different height limits that help accommodate that. So that's definitely something I think we'll probably want to talk more about with you in the future.
Good. Good. Anything else on this? Marty?
I just wanted to make a comment based on the comment you made about all of our schools not being in compliance and creating a zoning district for all of the schools. So we would definitely be open to doing that in the future. But what we're really cautious about is that because of the need for us to get through this high school project, we don't want this project to be held hostage to the process of redistricting all of those schools, because that could put some, challenges on that. Yeah.
Sure, that makes sense.
Great.
I would imagine that whatever we do with this will probably be a model for how might be expanded to some of the other schools, but no, your
That's what-
point is well taken.
That's the way we're all looking at it too.
Good. Anyone else before we close this out? Randy?
Yeah, thanks. I was just gonna throw out there, and it's probably sort of common sense anyway, but there was discussion that we had when we met earlier that even, throwing out there what we need as we develop plans that feel like they're going to work for the 21st century, we want to make sure that we also build in future adaptability. So we have enough flexible room that we don't just give us either, whether it's height, setback, or lot coverage, or whatever the criteria is. We probably want to look at it beyond the boundaries of this process that we're in right now, because we don't know where the city will be in the future, right? So we want to make sure that there's enough flexibility in the ability to grow if there's a need to grow, or whatever those needs may be down the road too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just the one thing I'll say on that is, as you see in this process, zoning might be complicated to change, but it is changeable. So, again, come back with what what you're looking for, but don't be too worried about things over that's needed in 10 or 20 years from now, because there'll be a whole different group of people sitting around the tables here who could help with that kind of stuff. I mean, of course, give yourselves the flexibility, you're asked for the flexibility that you need, but things can change over time as well. So you're not, whatever it is we do, you're not going to be locked in forever for that one way or another. Good. Again, thank you for coming, and it doesn't look like there's any other questions or comments, so we'll close out this item.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. We look forward to seeing what proposals come back to us.
All right, thanks.
We'll move on to item 6, which is annual update for joint institutional parking management plan. Take care, folks.
All right. We are currently bringing on Sandy Tebow and Josh Katz, who are both from CATMA, who are going to present this item to you. Hi, Josh.
Hello. Hey, Josh. Hey, Sandy.
Hi there. So I think I'll just go ahead and share my screen, if that
Okay.
works.
Yes.
And while Josh is doing that, I'll just tee this item up. So especially for the newer commissioners that have never been through a process of reviewing the joint institutional parking management plan, we were talking about this a few weeks ago in the context of the proposed changes to the parking ordinance that were referred to you by the city council. So this process is one that CATMA helps to shepherd for UVM, Champlain College, and UVM Medical Center. And typically we see this once every 5 years as they're preparing a multi-year plan for both changes in enrollment, staffing, new construction projects, and changes in their parking and other TDM, I guess, offerings, I'll say. The Planning Commission is advisory to the Development Review Board in that process. So typically you see this as a draft before it gets sent to the DRB to review and approve so that it can be applied in the permitting process. But for those of you who might remember the update process from a couple of years ago, one thing that we noted was that we could really do a better job reviewing this plan on an annual basis with the Planning Commission so that you can understand how previous plans have been performing over time rather than just once every 5 years, and understanding some of the issues that the institutions are grappling with as they go. So this is actually the first time that the Planning Commission is hearing an annual update on this plan from CATMA. There's no formal action that you have to take in this process. It's mostly advisory and an opportunity for you to ask questions and just hear from CATMA about how things are going. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sandy and Josh.
Great. Well, thank you, Megan, and good to see everybody. I was going to kind of recap that, so thank you for doing that for me. So yeah, I guess everything that Megan said, this is the first time that we are presenting an annual update. Traditionally, we've submitted them to the city staff and planning commission, but it feels like this is a valuable process to go through annually. We have some new data points, and we just really appreciate the engagement of city staff and the planning commission and public input. Our first 5-year plan was 2009 to 2014. So we've had a decade of these plans, and it really was time for an overhaul. And I think we're definitely improving the document through everybody's engagement and input. So, and we look forward to continuing to making these improvements. Go ahead, Josh.
Do you see the screen? Everyone sees the slideshow, just to make sure.
Yes, the 2021 Joint Institution Parking Management Plan Annual Update.
Yep, fantastic.
And I'm just going to go over really briefly. I think everybody here is familiar with CATMA, but we were established by the Three Hill Institutions in 1992. So we're celebrating our 30th birthday this April. And it was formed to jointly plan transportation and parking for more efficient and coordinated land use planning, reducing environmental impacts, and offering employees and students a comprehensive suite of transportation options. CATMA is one of 2 TMAs in Vermont. There's about 175 TMAs in the country, so we are not unique, although they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. We're a 501c3 nonprofit membership-based organization. Just a reminder, what TDM, Transportation Demand Management, is a set of strategies to encourage people to use multimodal transportation options, counterbalancing the incentive to drive. And that's done through programming, planning, and policy. In 2015, CATMA expanded to a regional TMA in Chittenden County, which meant that we opened up membership to businesses and developers in Chittenden County. So our membership has grown. We have about 90 businesses and developers and municipalities in our in our business network. So we're really engaging and educating more businesses and organizations on what TDM is and the value. So yeah, just a little quick overview of CATMA. And then the JIP, an overview of the JIP. So we have the 5-year JIP, and then annual updates as required per Article 8 of the Burlington CDO, as you know. And these reports are great. I mean, they're a tool for the institutions to demonstrate parking demand. And when lower than requirements outlined in the CDO, we are able to receive what amounts to a parking waiver for projects submitted for zoning permits that are listed in the 5-year report or our current 2-year report. And it's also, this report is a tool for us to manage and monitor parking demand and resources holistically and creatively with TDM strategies and coordinate transportation and parking. As Megan mentioned just a minute ago, the annual update is updating employment numbers, enrollment numbers, parking policy updates, TDM strategies, and it's basically providing an update to data that was provided in the 5-year JIP, currently a 2-year JIP. And I just want to mention a few new data points in the report. We had implemented a quarterly lot count procedure in the fall of 2019. We wanted to collect the data quarterly versus annually as it was done before for other 5-year reports, because we feel it really truly demonstrates the parking utilization. So city staff and CATMA concurred that the lot counts are really a better data point for parking demand estimates. And the survey data is more instrumental in illustrating travel behavior trends. So we implemented the lot counts in fall 2019, then COVID arrives, but we continue to conduct those quarterly lot counts, which Josh will share with you in a moment. So we have 2 years of lot counts. We have more to follow. And then in this upcoming year, we'll be preparing for our next 5-year plan, and we'll need to determine how to utilize these lot counts to calculate the parking demand estimates. Another new data point that you see in this annual update, we've been working on providing the impacts of TDM in our 2-year, the current 2-year JIP. We had added in new TDM effects, which included the new bike share system and motorcycle parking. This year, we worked with Car Share Vermont. They provided us with some research and calculation of car sharing impacts on parking demand, which you can find in the appendix. So we want to continue to expand on the impacts of TDM in the upcoming 5-year plan. And I'm not sure where Burlington stands on a TDM impact study, but maybe timing wise, we'll be able to use some of that, the outcomes of that study to add to the 5-year. And I think, Josh, I'm going to turn it over to you to sort of give the collective report on the data.
Great. So now we're going to get into the real meat and potatoes, if you will, of the report. So on this slide, you could see in table 2.1 on the left, that is the current conditions from this year's 2021 annual update, current parking conditions. And then on the right in table 2.2, that is the future projections of parking conditions from the 2020 to 2022 joint institutional parking management plan. So on the right, that's actually a 5-year projection in the future. Since it was originally a 5-year plan, but only got approved for 2 years. And we thought it'd be relevant for you to kind of like compare where we thought we would be versus where we are right now. So I just like to turn your attention to one of the, I think, more important numbers here is the current peak parking utilization. Sandy mentioned we've been doing these quarterly lot counts over the past couple of years. So what this is, this number, the current peak parking utilization, is the peak parking utilization at any time at any count over the last year. So that would be 2021, as we did 4 counts. And all of these parking utilization counts all the peaks were lower than the projected demand 5 years in the future. In other words, these institutions are doing a lot better than they thought they were in terms of parking demand. In UVM's case, it's like 1,500 spaces less than expected. So really you could see there's a big difference, that clearly the pandemic has some impacts on parking demand. And you could really see that here. Yeah, so
I just want to interject there really quick, Josh, sorry. But this is sort of our new way of presenting updates. Megan and Planning Commission is looking at what we projected in the 5-year, and then each year looking at where we stand. I don't think we've really ever, sort of done this type of comparison in a presentation. But I think this is a good exercise to go through, to have it all right there. So.
great, thank you, Sandy.
Sorry.
No problem. So now we will, I'll continue and now Sandy will talk a little bit about the collective TDM.
Yeah, so this is just a list of some of the TDM strategies that are in place at the institutions, many of which CATMA administer and manage. We have the CATMA Bike Walk Program, campus and employee shuttles, offsite parking and shuttles, bike infrastructure, bike share, car share, education, outreach, and awareness. And then each institution also has some additional TDM strategies they offer, which are outlined in the update. Now, telework is also a TDM strategy, which has been and continues to be utilized due to the pandemic, helpful in reducing VMTs and greenhouse gases. So it's going to be interesting to see how telework trends over the next, 2 or 3 years in particular, along with telehealth, sort of what those trends are. So you will see in the annual update some additional data on institutional telework policies and telework participation. I also wanted to mention that in this annual update, there is not CATMA specific transit data. Transit's been fare free for a couple of years now, and Green Mountain Transit is planning to reinstate fares on July 5th, 2022. So we've been meeting with GMT to prepare for the launch of our unlimited access program, which provides UVM and Champlain employees and students with free rides. So in the annual update, you'll see we did want to provide some idea of what transit ridership is. I think it is still down about 35%. But when we reinstate the unlimited access program in the next 5-year, we should be back to providing institutional ridership data for transit. All right.
Yeah, so now I'll just kind of walk through a couple of key data points from each of the 3 institutions. Yeah, so first we have Champlain College. On the left, figure 3.6 is, you could see the drive alone rate as a primary commute mode over time. And this is for both employees, students within a half a mile and students outside of a half a mile. And these numbers we'll use the similar numbers in each of the 3 institutions are all from CATMA's fall transportation survey, which is conducted about every other year. This is a comprehensive survey where we ask about a whole bunch of transportation options, preferences, why you don't take the bus, all that good stuff. So that's where this data point is from. This year in Champlain College, drive alone rates are up. But as you could see in figure 3.1 on the right, parking utilization is actually down from fall 2019, which aligns with the same time we did the survey. So it's the interesting conundrum of people might be driving more. No, sorry, more people might be driving, but they might be driving less as a result of telework and more flexible work schedules. So even though more people may be driving, the actual parking utilization and parking demand is way down, more than 10% at Champlain College.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, yeah.
When you say parking utilization, does that mean parking utilization in Champlain College provided parking?
Yeah, sorry, good clarifying question. Yes, so that is talking about utilization of parking lots on like throughout Champlain. So all their
Yeah.
parking lots.
So if people are driving more, they probably, maybe they're using Champlain parking lots less, but they're parking, they may be parking more. They're just parking not on Champlain College property.
Yes, that is definitely also a possibility. I mean, we don't truly know what is affecting these parking utilization like numbers. We surmise that it is mostly based on like telework and more flexible work schedules, but that could also be the case in theory.
There may be more parking available off campus than previously, just because of commuting trends to Burlington in general. There's more parking available. So you may be seeing fewer people parking at Champlain College because there's more free parking available other places, just because of, you know, COVID and people not commuting. It's pretty easy to drive down parking utilization, right? Just charge for parking, make it really expensive. People aren't going to pay to park on Champlain College.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to kind of talk about towards the end is the on-street parking
Yeah, sure.
opportunities.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So we didn't really discuss sustainable modes. Mostly we didn't discuss it here on this slide. For the most part, they are a little down from where they were previously, but telework is up, unsurprisingly, from where we were in 2019. So those numbers are kind of different. I could get into those at the end if you'd like. So just moving on to UVM. UVM sees a similar trend in terms of employee drive alone rates, in that they are up from 2019, but students driving to campus are way down. In fact, students, there are almost no students who live within a half a mile of campus who are driving to campus as their primary commute mode. And I think a lot of that is due to them not being allowed to get a permit on campus. But again, you see this trend of parking utilization down across the board at UVM. Emily, you mentioned it. You probably have the same question. We don't know exactly like what that effect is. Again, we surmise that it is telework because of flexible work schedules. Less people are driving less often, but truly we don't know the exact reason why that's the case. Now moving on to the University of Vermont Medical Center. For the UVM Medical Center, since 2019, since we last did the survey, drive alone rates are down, and parking utilization numbers are also down at both One South Prospect and the main campus. So across the board, parking utilization is down from where we were in fall of 2019, and drive alone rates. And now I'll give it back to Sandy to talk about us moving forward.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I just wanted to, take some time to answer any questions, but just to let you know where we're at moving forward. The first 5-year plan, as I mentioned, was 2009 to 2014. And after a decade of reporting, we wanted to bring it in-house to rework the content, improve our survey data instrument and methodology, working with the TRC, the Transportation Research Center, on parking estimates in our survey instrument, and just creating a more concise document. We've met with city staff over the past few years to discuss improvements to the JIP. We've received some great feedback from the Planning Commission, the DRB, and public input. This report does require a lot of the CATMA analyst time, which I'm really appreciative of the time and hard work that they put into getting the document to where we are today. But the next 5-year plan, which will be 2023 to 2028, we will be going back out to consultation on the project through an RFP process. The next 5-year plan will address the DRB findings that they provided us from the 2020-2022 plan. It will include updated data from our fall 2022 survey that we'll be conducting to employees and students. We'll continue to conduct our quarterly lot counts, and we want to expand on the impacts of TDM on parking demand. And also, it would be great to partner with the city on the on-street parking sort of counts or regulating the streets. So that's kind of the end of our presentation. Megan, do you have, should I answer any specific questions or other questions here? How shall we proceed?
Let me ask Megan or Scott or any of the commissioners, do you have any questions or comments on any of this?
Would it be helpful, Sandy, or Josh, sorry, if you stopped sharing your screen for right now? Thank you.
Emily?
I recall, several years ago, I think it was maybe 3 years ago, that the numbers for students living within half a mile of campus were really, and commuting to campus were really high. And it seems like, looking at the data that you're presenting, that it's showing something really different. So I'm wondering, did you change the questions? And is the students that live less than half a mile from campus commuting to campus, are you only measuring students that are driving from off campus to on campus, or are you measuring students that are driving off campus to close to campus? Like, what is the question that you're asking in the survey?
So I can't talk about what we did 3 years ago, as I wasn't here, and maybe Sandy can talk about that a little more. But what I can,
why is it so different?
Yeah, so I can talk about the question from, like, the question we asked this year and the phrasing of it, and then Sandy,
Sure.
if you want to add on to that, you can. So how we asked that in our survey is we asked whether a student is on campus or off campus, and then whether they live within a half a mile or outside of a half a mile. So it's really self-reported. So there could be some error there as well. But this is only for off-campus students living within a half a mile.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question I'm asking is, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt, Sandy, go ahead.
Sorry. So I'd have to go back actually a few years ago to see exactly how we asked the question. What I will say is that this year we did conduct the survey differently at UVM than we have had previously due to their new policies on conducting surveys. We always had conducted our surveys 100% solicitation. And this year, Josh helped me out, the Office of Research provided us with, can you speak to that, Josh, what the amount was for?
Yeah, sure. So typically surveys like this are not really done like full solicitation when you're doing a survey, but we've always done it in this way and we like it that way. But UVM changes policy around that, so we had to work around that. And what we did is we surveyed, like they gave us a random list of 1,000 students and 1,000 employees. So that's the list that we're working from.
So they gave you a random list of 1,000 students and 1,000 employees, and you were allowed to solicit out of that 1,000. Okay. And there's 10,000 UVM students. So you were able to solicit 10% of UVM's population. So how many survey results did you get?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I think it was around 350 for employees, and then around 200, somewhere around that number for students.
Okay.
I just want to follow up on Emily's question, and Michael, I know you have another one, and you may still have more, Emily, but of the students, the 250 or so that you got back, was that all of the students, or was that just the ones living off campus within a half mile? Or, like how much
Yeah.
data was in that? How
Yeah.
much data was in that?
Yeah, so we got 250 students to respond to our survey in total, and that in theory is a random group of any of so-and-so students.
Okay, and of the
And then-
250, do you know how many fit that criteria of, living relatively close to campus?
Sorry, I don't off the top of my head. What I can tell you is that we weight the data for UVM, the medical center in Champlain specifically, in order to make sure we have like a truly random sample. But I can look that up and get back to you with that number.
So if I could just add, I do think that the survey participation rates were in the update that Josh and Sandy shared with us that are in the agenda packet. So some of those details are there.
Mhm.
And Emily is specifically asking a question about something that I know was a focus of conversation in previous presentations of the JIP, but just this very confusing phenomenon of people who live in theory very close to campus that are still driving. And so if you look at in the update document, there is a link to the approved 2020 to 2022 plan. And you can find the tables that compare the annual update survey results with the results that were in that plan. And that is actually something I figured you all would ask about, so I had looked into before this meeting. I think where we see some of the differences for Champlain students that live within a half mile of campus, there was a reduction of about 10% reporting driving alone to be their primary mode of transportation, but an increase of about 10% of students who reported that driving alone was another mode of transportation that they used. So that was one. And then for UVM, really quickly, if I could just scroll to it. I think as the CATMA folks said, the driving alone, living within a half mile went from just 3% of students to 0% in the most recent survey. And it sounds like maybe as a result of a change of a policy. And the percent of students that said that they lived within a half mile and drove alone as another mode was essentially the same from last year or from the approved plan.
I have a question for Sandy.
Let me just check in, because I cut Emily off, maybe. Did you have any more questions, or you all set, Emily?
I don't have any more questions. I think that the policies that UVM and the CATMA is putting in place are good policies, and they're effective for getting people to not park on campus. And that, I think the big issue is that there's just a lack of coordination between CATMA and I guess DPW and I guess maybe the administration to coordinate this impact of students that end up commuting and employees that end up commuting and parking in neighborhoods. And whether you are concerned about it because you don't like people parking in your neighborhood or because it is our largest climate impact, our largest carbon impact is commuting. So we're putting all these restrictions and great policies in place, but there's this huge hole in the bucket. And that is the thousands of free parking spaces that we have all around the city that subsidize people being single car commuters, single occupancy vehicle commuters to Burlington. So you can provide shuttles and parking and charge for parking and incentives and vouchers and rides home, but we're doing that out of one side of our mouth, and then out of the other side of our mouth, we're giving away thousands of free parking spots and subsidizing. So I think that's just the glaring deficiency in our public policy that we're just not addressing. So this is a great plan, and I commend UVM and Champlain for putting these resources in place. But, we've got this flood of a problem that we're not addressing. So I guess that's my big feedback on this.
Thanks.
And I will speak to that, Andy, just because I know that this is
Sure.
also something that we've talked about before. Sandy knows that we had been working with them to try to coordinate having DPW do on-street parking counts at the same time they were doing lot counts. Unfortunately, with COVID and staffing shortages that DPW has been experiencing, we were not able to make those counts happen at the same time. One of the things that did happen last summer, our office had an intern that was working on another project for us, but we had asked for some help to go out and kind of verify parking regulations on some of the residential streets in the immediate vicinity of the campus, boundaries, and fill in some gaps in GIS mapping that we had for other regulated parking zones, so that we could come up with a better understanding of, where are the blocks and streets that are unregulated around the campuses, so that in the future, if we have the capacity, we know where we can target our efforts in terms of doing some on-street parking counts. And, I have to say, in taking a look at that map, there were surprisingly fewer sections of street that are completely unregulated than I think even I thought existed out there. But it is a kind of start for us to have some information to work off of when we have the capacity to do street counts at the same time.
Thank you. I think, Michael, you had raised your hand before, and then we'll come to you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I guess this is kind of a remedial question. Understand that the Planning Commission is just here for comment, but has the plan ever been looked at by sub area? Because looking at, if you look at the maps that are sort of color coded by utilization rates, it strikes me that there's some natural break areas, and that in aggregate, you might be shown a surplus, but in fact, some areas of campuses are in less demand than others, and you have what is a pretty substantial walk, obviously, from one side to the other that would be out of sort of a pedestrian range. So I guess that's just kind of a question on background, because it seems like it would be a meaningful difference in the conclusions.
Yeah, and I can just say the parking utilization map is a new addition to the plan that we added in 2020, the last 2-year plan, and continuing to add it in. So, Josh is fairly new. He been on board here for about 6 months. So he has some great GIS skills, and, we can discuss about how we can continue to improve or validate, to your point.
And Michael, that was actually something that we talked a bit about in the first iteration of this plan when those maps were introduced. Because I think, we as a staff and a planning commission noticed that as well, including the high variability between some lots that seem to be at 100% capacity and other ones that seem to have a lot of excess capacity. And I know part of that also at the time was discussed in terms of just the different parking policies that apply. Some of those lots might be satellite lots, they might be residential permit holders only, they might be faculty only. There's some different factors that might influence some of the utilization rates as well.
Got it. Makes perfect sense. But if you can somehow control for those, I think you're probably likely to find that some areas are undersupplied and some areas are oversupplied. It really dynamic pricing sort of just makes a lot of sense in that environment, but that's for another day.
Yes.
Alex?
My question was just, was following up on the survey methodology, and I was wondering if you, so Josh surveyed 1,000 students. We got to about 250 responses. How does that compare to 3 years earlier, Sandy? Do you recall like what your sample was?
So when we had solicited 100%, our response rate for students was between 25 and 30%. So 12,500 students, and we'd receive about, say, our average 25%.
Mhm.
And for employees, it was 100% listserv and in the vicinity of, I would say, 15 to 23% for employees.
Cool, thank you.
Good, thanks. Anyone else? Now,
One
I know
other
we
thing
had, oh,
that I
Megan?
was just going to mention that you may have noticed in this update is a reference to active transportation plans and sustainability plans for each of the institutions. So that was an addition that came out of the DRB's most recent approval of the 2-year plan. They in particular were looking at some of the requirements in the language, our existing language about transportation demand management and Article 8 that said, you know, we're really trying to impact all these different issues as it relates to transportation, energy consumption, et cetera. And they had actually asked for future plans to speak directly to how these helped further active transportation and sustainability plans for each of the institutions.
Yeah, I will say, just adding on to that point, I know UVM and Champlain are in like the process of updating those plans right now and creating new plans. So we look forward to, as they're going through those processes, being involved in that and incorporating that into the JIP.
And I'll just close with, you know, we're excited. Hopefully we're coming out of the pandemic here, and we will be doing a lot of work to encourage people to use sustainable modes, you know, whether they're coming to work 2 days a week or 3 days a week. Certainly the past 2 years, we've really focused on just providing information and education on how to ride the bus safely, how to carpool safely. So looking forward to kind of going back to, you know, getting more people using other modes.
So before we close, I know during the public forum, we had some comments and questions about the parking plan. And unfortunately, I didn't make notes of what those questions were, but I don't know if you remember what they were. I just want to make sure that, you know, there were some responses to those questions. Michael?
I remember one of them because it struck me as well. The off-street parking survey results. It seems to me like that was a glitch in the survey because those results seem off, obviously.
I think what that is, so the on-street parking, there was a comment about a low number of people parking on the street. And again, that would be, now that you've heard sort of how we collected the data with UVM. And then also those are people that responded to the survey, you know, that drove a car and parked on the street. So that is just based on our survey, on the survey data that we have.
So to expand on that a little bit, I think, you know, you use your survey responses to extrapolate more of a campus population estimate for travel behavior. Did you do the same with that on-street parking behavior, or is that just the actual number of responses that you received?
Yes, that's just the number of responses we received.
Okay, so that would be why it was so small then. So it hasn't been extrapolated. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we just added the on-street parking 2 surveys ago, you know, starting to try to collect that data so we can better understand what the on-street, you know, parking impact is. And certainly we're happy to partner with the city on, you know, how to better collect data of surrounding streets, you know, around campus. But I guess I can follow up with you on that, Megan. We just conducted February lot counts last week, so our next counts will probably be April.
Great.
So,
Thank you. Anything else?
And Andy, one other question that you got during the public forum, or one other question that I specifically wrote down was about parking at the satellite lot on University Road. And specifically in relation to some of the discussion that you heard about Trinity campus, what would some of the impacts be of, I think, changing what parking is made available to UVM Medical Center versus used by the institution itself, by UVM itself? And I don't know, Sandy or Josh, if you're the right ones to answer that.
well, I think the Trinity development discussion is occurring as we speak. I don't really have an answer to that question. I'm not really clear. Is that an off-site lot at UVM for UVM? I'm not clear of the question.
Okay. All right. So there's the question that just came up, since they do lock counts quarterly, are they counting parking spaces during? Get that. Are they counting parking spaces during the summer when most students are away? How is this low summer count skewing? And if so, is this low summer count skewing parking lot utilization rate during the academic year?
Josh, do you want to, I know that's
Yep.
in the annual update, but
Yep, so all that is in the annual update, like the specific averages of counts over the year. They do it in the summer, and they do it, so the counts occur in February, the one that just occurred, which is the winter count. There's one in, I think it is May, and then there's July, and then there's October. So those are the 4 times, so you get a bunch of, the point is to get like all different times when different user groups are using the parking. And so that might affect how the map looks a little bit, because that is an average of parking utilization over time during the whole year. But the peak utilization number is just the peak of use at any time. So the peak number, which shows like what is the most amount of people who are using the parking at any given time during the year, that is not affected. That's not an average, so it's not affected by this.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, unless there are other questions or comments, which I don't see, thank you very much for coming and providing us with your presentation.
thank you for the input and the engagement. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you,
Take care.
everyone.
All right, take care and have a good
Bye-bye.
evening.
You too.
So we'll close that item and we're on to item 7, which is proposed CDO amendment for ZA-22-03 steep slopes. And this is a time permitting item. I know like we try not to introduce new items or start a new substantive item after 8 o'clock, but just want to check in with folks and with you, Megan and Scott. Scott, I know you've been patiently waiting. Is this something that is time sensitive, or is this one that could be put onto a future agenda?
It is not time sensitive. It's not super complicated. Your call as to whether you want to push it back or touch on it tonight.
Where are folks on this one? From those on the ordinance committee who looked at this, is this something that will take us a little bit of time, or is this something that you think could do fairly quickly?
Yeah, I'm often surprised at what turns into a length of time, but I think it's fairly quick. I think the issues are fairly simple to bring to a head.
Yeah, and from staff's perspective, it's not time sensitive, but the other thing is, if you want to hear about it tonight and schedule it for a public hearing, then we can always, if you have any concerns about it, you have the opportunity to make some tweaks to it when you hold the public hearing. So.
Folks open to continuing? Okay, I'm not seeing any pushback, so let's continue.
Go ahead, Scott.
I'm going to do a quick share screen with a map. So thumbs up, you see the map? Okay, great. So the idea of dealing with steep slope standards in Burlington has been kicking around for a few years now. I think it was October of 2019, there was I'll say significant slope failure on Riverside. And as I'm sure most or all of you know, that there have been even worse slope failures, especially along Riverside going back decades. So the map here shows slopes in the city of 15% or greater, measured on 50-foot intervals. And so there's no surprises here. We see a lot along the Winooski River corridor, and also the bluffs along the lake shore, and then out again at Star Farm, Sunset Cliff. So the standards that we've put together aren't super complicated. They're not intended to be. The building code contains more detailed standards as to what soil analysis involves and what sort of standards would apply to geotechnical analysis. What the zoning amendment really does is put it on the applicant's radar early in the process, because zoning is always first, that identifies within these areas you need to pay attention to steep slopes. And this map, I'll point out two things. One, it still needs to be tweaked to include the 50-foot buffer from the top of the slope. I'm working with DPW and getting that done in the next week or two. The other piece is that it's a little bit like the wetland map in that it's pretty accurate to show you where they are, but like the wetland map, ground truthing will be needed on any given parcel for a development proposal to tell exactly where the boundaries are. So this generally tells us where they are. We'll need ground truthing, and the standard in the zoning code basically says within these areas you need to do a geotechnical analysis, you need to provide a site plan. But again, it really leaves the nitty-gritty of what all is involved in that analysis to the building code, right? There's no need to reinvent the wheel or duplicate it here. I'll say that the only significant change that came out of the ordinance committee was that the committee wanted to see that standard or that requirement made as a condition of approval. So the applicant has some idea as to whether they're going to be approved, right, before sinking the money and time into actually doing the geotech analysis. So that's it in a nutshell. The map needs a little bit more work before it's ready for prime time. But the standards are really geared at putting it on the applicant's radar before proceeding to put a foundation in the ground. Any questions?
Great, thanks. Questions for Scott? I can't see anybody.
Sorry, I'll stop the share.
Good. Any questions for Scott? Any comments from the ordinance committee on this? Emily?
Yeah, I just thought I would quickly comment and say that we did have, quite a bit of conversation about this. And, given safety concerns, I think there was a consensus that it was necessary to have a geotech analysis for these projects. And I think, we made that significant change of making it a condition of approval, but not a condition of review, so that people aren't spending the money on the geotech analysis if they don't have a viable project or they don't make it through the approval process. So I was in support of it, and I think it's worth moving forward, and it would be an improvement. So
good, thanks. Anyone else?
Just had a thought. I mean, it sounds like a good idea to me, but I just was wondering, were there any other examples in the zoning code of this sort of, I think of zoning, and maybe I'm wrong about this, is contiguous areas, everything it's a patchwork, but when you're in one zone or another, and this is like a different concept of an overlay zone, and it just strikes me as a little odd, but I think that's maybe up to the landowner.
We do
because-
have other, oh, sorry.
Wetlands and shoreline, probably?
Yeah,
Yeah, we
all of our
understand that.
natural resource overlays and the high school actually mentioned it today. So, you know, their primary parcels are zoned residential or recreation, conservation, open space. And then there's also an overlay district on the Arms Park that identifies that natural resource community and establishes a buffer around it. So we do have, you know, a number of examples of overlay districts that float, for lack of a better word, over kind of individual parcel boundaries or over other types of zoning districts.
Cool.
Anyone else? So a recommended action from staff, from Scott and Megan, was for us to approve the amendment report and warn for a public hearing. Is there anyone who wants to make that motion? Emily,
Motion to move this forward, warn for public hearing. Approve.
approve the bylaw amendment report. Got it. Motion by
Approve
Emily,
the bylaw amendment.
and Alex, was that your hand that went up for a second?
That is.
Seconded by Alex. Any more discussion? And part of this will also be, Scott, you're going to be updating the map?
Yeah, the map will be updated to include that 50-foot top of slope buffer, and it'll also be reformatted into the text.
Good. And so with that understanding, all those in favor of the motion, say aye, raise your hand. Any opposed? That is unanimous. So great, thanks. Yeah, you're right, it didn't take very much time. Good work, and thank you to the ordinance committee, because the reason it didn't take much time tonight is because you folks spent a lot of time, it sounds like, on this. And that's certainly how we like to use our committee. So thank you for your work as well. Item 8 is the commissioner items. Our upcoming meetings are March 8th and March 22nd. Any other commissioner items or committee reports? And I see there's item of interest.
So there are a couple of items that were shared with you. One was in there in case you were able to catch it before tonight's meeting. There was a presentation about the high school project last week. I think that there should be a recording of the presentation available at the website that's in the agenda if you'd like to take a look at it. The other one was a question about the neighborhood project. This came up in the context of talking about Trinity campus. So what's in your agenda is actually just a link to the neighborhood project report for reference. I'm going to be meeting with some folks from CEDO and the Department of Permitting and Inspections, who have primarily been the ones coordinating on the implementation of some of the items that came out of the neighborhood project. We're going to get an update early next month, and I should have more to share with you after that.
Great, thank you. Any other commissioner comments? All right, then we'll close that item. On item 9 are minutes and communications. Is there a motion to approve the minutes and accept the communications? Motion by someone. Motion by Alex, seconded by Emily. All those in favor of the motion, say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? We have our minutes and communications, and motion to adjourn by, who's making our motion? By Bryn. And Bruce, I see your hand went up, seconded by Bruce. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
We stand adjourned. Thank you all very much. And
Thank you.
see